What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Accelerate Your Life podcast. This is a super special episode because this is our first guest episode. If you guys aren't watching on YouTube and your audio, I know you can't see her yet, but I have the lovely Nicole Neuwirth here. I'm so excited. She is one of the coaches at Accelerate Athletics, but not just that, she's also one of my very, very good friends and was my first client ever, which is so cool to have it all come so full circle that 3.5 years later, she's now a coach on the team, helping her own roster of clients with a lot of the things she struggled with. And it's just been such a cool journey. But I obviously, well, welcome, Nicole. First, I'll let you actually say hi and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's not just a fake person that I'm talking to. So yeah, how's the day going though so far? How are you feeling?
I'm in really good spirits because it's just beautiful fall weather right now in North Carolina, at least. So I'm very happy with that.
I am jealous. It's like this week in Texas, I noticed, I think there's maybe one day it's below 80 and I'm like shocked. I
That's
haven't seen below
good.
90 in days, but yeah, Nicole's still hanging out in North Carolina, which is where I'm originally from. And that actually kind of brings us to, I guess, where we originally met, which was at UNC Chapel Hill. So yeah, because we didn't really know each other, right, in college for the most part. No, yeah, I knew her husband, now husband, they weren't at the time. But Cam, and I knew him from our broadcast journalism program. For those of you, I think I talked about that in the last episode, but I was actually a broadcast journalism major, funny enough. And Cam was a director. He was behind the scenes doing all this stuff for our classes. So that's why I met him. I think the only thing I really I knew Nicole's name because Nicole was a rock star athlete. She was on our soccer team. And if you guys aren't women's soccer fans, then you might not know this, but if you are, you probably do. Chapel Hill is one of the best women's soccer programs in the country. So not only is she an awesome D1 athlete, but she was playing for one of the best schools. So yeah, that's what I knew about you. It was just like, you're a rock star.
Well, what I knew about you, Mallory, is I somehow Cam got me connected to your Instagram, like your OG, Mal's Fitting Foods. And so like over COVID, I remember watching it and like looking at your at-home workouts and then all the cool food and like things you were posting. I was like, man, I like this girl. And I just kept creeping on you for the longest time. And then finally you started launching coaching applications. I was like, oh my gosh, I got to do this.
I love it. Yeah, Cam hooked us up, and the rest is history. So shout out to Cam for one of my favorite relationships. I know you guys got your own, but ours is better. I'm just kidding. But yeah, that kind of brings me to like why I wanted to have you on the pod. I mean, obviously, I think it's great for everyone to get to know the rest of the EA team, but I was like, I need to have Nicole first because your history with, I think, athletics, and then because I think some people would hear that and people who weren't necessarily athletes prior would hear like, oh, she was a D1 athlete, and then like not too long after she needed coaching. Like, I don't really understand that, but I think that is where there is so much just misunderstanding of how difficult the transition out of athletics, whether you are at a high level or not, but you played that sport your whole life, like can be eventually when you kind of outgrow that. So I think that's just such an untalked about topic, that specifically being the difficulties of transitioning for something you do for 10, 15, I mean, 20 years of your life, like pretty much your entire conscious, memorable journey. I mean, I'm guessing like you were probably kicking a soccer ball from like what age?
4, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have a lot of memories, probably pre-4. So your entire life, and then it's just over. Like, I mean, there's probably like PTSD that comes from that.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I feel like you don't realize how much it takes up your life until it's over. And so that was something that I didn't really recognize. A lot of the issues that I struggled with, food and exercise related, like they didn't really arise, and I didn't really realize they were issues until post-college. And I feel like, especially even too, just like my husband, he would joke with me, he would be like, oh, Nicole, like you need to find a hobby now that you're outside of soccer. And I was like, he was like, what do you like to do? I was like, I don't know. I literally played soccer all the time. Like that took up my life. And so finally like finishing, graduating, and then being in that world where it's like, okay, well, how do I exercise now? What am I supposed to eat? Like I finally realized I had no idea what to do.
Yeah. I want to dive into that today because I think there's a lot of listeners that currently are navigating that or have navigated that or still navigating that. And, I was a very, very average athlete. I've talked about that. I think in the first episode, I was like, my goal of this podcast is to show you like I am so average and mediocre, and like that's normal and that's okay. But yeah, my joke is always that I'm a jack of all trades and like just very a jack at them, like very mediocre. I can do everything, but not well. So this is not a topic that I necessarily can like super, super relate to. So that's why I was like, I gotta have, Nicole on to kind of talk about it. So, well, let's kind of start, I guess, at the beginning. Like, what is your history with sports? I know you said you started when you were 4. So like, yeah, did you instantly take to it? What was that kind of like in the beginning of your life?
Yeah, so I grew up in a family where sports was just very much a part of our lives. Like everyone, my mom was super athletic. My dad actually played basketball at App State. And then my grandpa actually played basketball at Carolina. So just a very athletic family. And so grew up with a twin brother, and we were always very competitive with sports. And so, I played travel soccer since I was like 10 years old. But I also played a lot of other sports. So I did competitive dance, I did travel basketball. I tried swim, not good at that. That was a quick little journey there, but tried a lot of different sports. And so soccer is something that I knew from an early age. Like I liked basketball. I probably could have played basketball like in college somewhere like mid-major D1, but I knew from an early age that soccer was my passion. And so that is something that very quickly just took over my life. And I loved it so much.
What was your, like, if you can even think back to that entire time, what was your relationship with exercise like during it? Because you were playing all these different sports. So and as kids too, it's not like we're taught when we're 10, like you need to go work out. We're so active. So it's not something that's maybe thought about till later. But at what point did you begin to like think about, yeah, exercise, I guess, through your time with sports and soccer?
Yeah, it's funny because in all of those times, all of those years playing sport, like I was exercising for a specific purpose. And I've always been someone who's very structured, very organized, and always made sure I was on top of doing my fitness packet. So to making sure I was like super fit, making sure that I was doing extra work to, get extra touches on the ball and things like that. So it was always like there was a game plan, there was a rhyme and a reason behind what I was doing, and I could see those end results. And I could see them like very tangibly. Versus, transitioning into that life outside, it was like, okay, well, now I don't have a specific purpose. What am I supposed to be training for now? Because I don't have an end goal here. Like I'm not getting ready for something.
Definitely. That's super interesting because I think a lot of people like I could see, the two sides of it. I think there's either that camp of people who they really struggle post their sport because they never had to think about exercise, just because it was like you're so active, you never have to worry about it. It was just, and they didn't look at it as exercise. It's like I'm showing up to play my sport, right? And then for you, it was maybe like you were conscious and aware that you were exercising or training, but it was like I'm exercising or training to improve my like ability at this thing, right? And then that goal that you're working towards is no longer there. That's tough. How did that translate outside of it? Like, did you feel more lost, or did you quickly go into a maybe route of the goal being something that wasn't very healthy? Like maybe, yeah.
I think it very quickly shifted into more of a disordered mindset towards exercise when I didn't have that specific goal I knew I was training for. It was more so, especially like approaching my senior year, working through my senior year, knowing that it was ending. And then like I remember one vivid memory, like we used to wear a GPS tracker. And that would just track, our overall heart rate, like it would track different stats and things like that. But it also tell you your calorie burn for that workout. And like at the time, we wouldn't care too much, but like towards the end, I started to notice like, oh, I'm burning X amount of calories in this soccer practice. And so I knew that I was like, I need to keep burning this amount of calories like post soccer. And so I would start to go into exercise sessions, workouts, anything, knowing that I needed to burn a certain amount of calories. And all I ever knew was to, obviously we did strength training in the gym, but I didn't have a ton of education about the why behind that. I more so just knew I needed to do this. It's going to keep me strong on the field, but also I needed to do a lot of cardio so I could stay in shape. And I hated cardio. So it was very much like I was forcing myself to do those types of things because I felt like I needed to keep doing it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because for a lot of women, just with how we grew up, there's so much focus on weight, calories burned, calories ate, like things consumed, stuff like that. And you probably didn't have to pay so much attention to that when you were such an active athlete, but it's the easiest thing to revert to when now you don't have a goal, like trying to get touches on the ball, trying to be faster. Those goals are not necessary anymore. So what's the easiest next goal that you've learned about growing up as a woman? Be smaller, eat less, right? So it's probably pretty easy for it to shift immediately to that kind of goal.
Yeah. And then knowing too, one thing that I struggled with on the nutrition side of things was like, okay, I know I'm not burning X amount of calories at 2 sessions a day, going to practice, going to lift. Now I knew I needed those carbs then, but now I'm not doing all of that. So I'm like, I can't have as much carbs. Like I can't eat as much carbs. Like I can't have pasta. I can't have bread because I'm not burning as much calories. And so I started to really restrict on those things and just be afraid of them, even though I loved them so much.
What you mentioned earlier, you said that you started to kind of notice this towards the end of your senior year, like when you knew it was coming to an end. Did you struggle pretty immediately after you're like that last minute on the field? Like, was it an instant, like, what do I do now? Or maybe it even sounds like before, or did it kind of gradually sneak up on you after your last game and finishing with your sport?
It was definitely a little more gradual just because definitely when the season was over, we were done. I definitely was obviously very just burnt out. So it took like a couple of weeks, just absolutely nothing. But then it was kind of that like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm going to do for exercise. And the very first thing I started to do was burn boot camp, which again, nothing against burn boot camp out there. It's a good workout. I'm actually so glad I don't do that anymore because I remember like convincing myself you need to do this because I felt like I needed to do a workout where I was drenched in sweat because that's all I'd ever known and where I was just absolutely exhausted walking out of it. And so I tried to find something that was replicating that. And I liked the competitive aspect of it, but it wasn't the right mindset behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because you're again spending 20 years, like, especially as you get older and get into the travel leagues, and practices are hours and weekends are Saturday, Sunday, you're playing 5 games back to back. Like you kind of get used to that mindset of it's grind, like it's a grind and I need to be dead to the world like when it's over. And did you kind of struggle with that translating into, because I'm doing air quotes, like normal people typically are working out maybe 30 minutes to an hour a day. Did you struggle with that feeling like enough?
Yeah, I definitely struggled with that. I felt like I needed to work out. Like I felt like a failure if I didn't get my workout done before I went to classes. So I would go to like the 5 a.m. workout class at Chapel Hill and just get that over with. Like there were certain things in the back of my mind where I was just trying to hold myself to certain standards that just weren't healthy or necessary. And so I was really miserable too. Like I hated it. But I was just holding myself to those standards still.
Because I know it was also pretty, I mean, we started working together in like July something of, I think it was about a year after we graduated. So yeah, you had about a year in between that time. If you kind of put yourself back into that year in between before we started and when you finished that last game, what do you feel like was the hardest part that you struggled with, maybe mentally or just every day? Like, what was kind of that feeling you were kind of, yeah, carrying all that time?
I mean, I struggled both, obviously, fitness wise and nutrition wise. I think on the fitness side of things, I didn't necessarily struggle with like losing my identity because I had dealt with a lot of injuries in college. And so I was able to recognize that, hey, my identity is more than just like Nicole, the soccer player. There's more to me that comes to the table that I can bring to the table. And so I was at least able to be very solid in that foundation. But I struggled on the fitness side of things of trying to figure out what I liked to do to work out, what was going to bring me joy and purpose in my workouts and want something that, and I just really struggled with that because I felt like I still needed to do certain things. And then food wise, like, as you know, I'm a huge foodie and I love trying like going to different restaurants. I love cooking. And I just felt very restrictive in not allowing myself to do those things because I knew, hey, you're not playing in a 90-minute game. You don't necessarily deserve to go, have this pizza or go out to eat and eat a burger. Like you can't eat like that anymore because you're not burning it off. So it was just that struggle of trying to find like some sort of balance, and I just didn't know how to find it.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of this question. I'm a big proponent of athletics. I think that like it's very, first of all, they're just very entertaining. I think it teaches you a ton of skills like discipline. And but one thing I think about often too is with these sports and especially getting to the high level, whether it be, you know, D1 or even like professional leagues after, is it so, what's the word I'm looking for? Like extreme that there's actually like detriments, right? So this might be like, I don't know if your answer will be a hot take to some people or not. I'm just curious. Like, do you think that there's a lot of like negatives to being a high performance athlete, or what negatives did you see that really made transitioning into being a healthy, normal human very difficult?
Yes, I think that there definitely are some negatives. And one of the biggest ones that I noticed is I really struggled and still struggle, obviously, because it's still always going to be a struggle with just like positive self-talk and body image. And being in, especially in a women's sports culture, it is so, so hard. And I remember dreading, we did this every preseason, pre and postseason, we would have bod pod testing. And so if you're not familiar with that, that's literally like you get down your sports bra and your spandex and you get in this little pod, and it's basically measuring your body fat percentage. And why we did it, I don't really know. Like they never explained to us, why we needed to have this data. I don't necessarily think it was the most relevant data for us to have. For me, it was just like I would have PTSD. I hated doing it. I was very self-conscious about it. And again, then if our percentage wasn't in like a great spot, they would tell us basically, okay, well, you need to be eating these types of things. And it was just very damaging for me to feel like my worth and like how I was translated and related to as a soccer player was based off of my body fat percentage, because everyone's body is so different. And that is one thing that I think was so, so negative is I know they did that with all of the women's sports teams. And I just don't think it was necessary.
Yeah, because I mean, you're kind of probably tying into like, am I going to be the mindset of, am I going to be on, you know, first string? Is this gonna affect me being first string, second string? And then you're tying this worth and what this number tells you. And I mean, man, think about too, like soccer is not even necessarily a aesthetic based sport, right? So like you think about things like cheer and dance. And I mean, I competed in a bodybuilding show, and like it is so like precedented on your physique. It's a hard thing to like, you think you're objective at that time, and you're like, yeah, it's just, you know, for the sport, but then you walk away and it's really hard to tear those two things apart. You also mentioned the positive self-talk. That's definitely a interesting one and a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I do see people who were very, very high level athletes and very successful sometimes having the toughest time staying objective about themselves when it comes to their own health and fitness journey, being proud of themselves, seeing their own accomplishments. It reminds me of one of my best friends. She was an only child and a very high level athlete. And I think those two things together made her very hard on herself. And it's something that's carried through, like, even in her academics. I watched her be extremely hard on herself. And yeah, it's how have you navigated that?
Yeah, and that's something that I feel like I didn't do a good job in college of really taking that side of the mental side of the game seriously, because that mental side, your mental psychology, it really does play a role in everything. And we had sports psychologists come in and work with us on just that mental side and mental toughness. But we also had, coaches who were like, you just need to be gritty and just be gritty, and like not actually how does this, like how do you become resilient?
Yeah.
What are ways you talk about yourself in a positive light? And so I feel like that's something through actually working with you that has really, really helped, because it is so easy to fall into that just like negative self-talk trap. And then if you start to think those things about yourself, you're going to believe it. They become a reality. And so that's one thing that I didn't learn until post-college. Like we talked about it some, but I don't think we talked about it enough. And especially like, how do we actually achieve and do these types of things?
Totally. And this is, I'll gonna pull our conversation back after this last comment, because we could go off on such a tangent on this one. But I think something I've talked about often on my social media is, I think the dichotomy of self-improvement and always working to be better and wanting to grow, and just this growth kind of movement, I think a lot of our generation is going through, which is great, right? Like it is so great to be self-aware and want to always improve. But then I think what can end up happening is that you're also never proud of yourself, and you're always looking for the faults to continue to fix. And I think that that's really parallels with with being a high level athlete too, because the way you get good is by always practicing to get better and knowing that you can get better and never settling. But at what point too are you just continuously being very hard on yourself and cussing at yourself when you don't score the goal, slapping yourself when you like miss the shot. And again, it's good to say, well, I can get better, let me go practice. But it's this interesting just dichotomy of finding the in between to do both that I think people struggle with in athletics, they struggle with in normal life. It is an interesting psychological dilemma. But with kind of getting back to that transition out of college, and you've have improved, especially in that mental side, like you mentioned, is there anything specific that you think you didn't have that could have made the transition as a whole better, or what you would maybe recommend for somebody who's like coming up on that transition out of it?
I think seeking out help. I couldn't have transitioned and found, progress without help. I absolutely could not have done it without myself. So like without you, without, some sort of team. So I think the biggest thing there is to like, if you're unsure, like do some research, like be an investigator. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's so much out there, but go to credible sources, and you'll find credible sources, obviously, like through our resources and things like that. But there's just a lot of information out there, and I wouldn't rely on like top TikTokers and things like that for valid information.
100%. Yeah, I think that just rings true for anyone like that's trying to kind
Yeah.
of learn and understand more about nutrition and training, all of that. Um, what about, I mean, this might be a very similar thing, but just, now that you've been through it and figured it out, like you've kind of been through both sides of it, what would you say to somebody who's like kind of on the, because I think we talk to a lot of people who have been on the other side out of their sport for several years and are just still trying to navigate it and really lost. Is there just any like kind of words of wisdom that you would say of, yeah, to somebody who is struggling with that?
Definitely one, give it time. It takes time. But two, like there are so many portions of like your health and fitness journey. If you're still struggling with like some sort of competitive outlet, you can be super competitive with yourself. You can be
Yeah.
super, like in the gym, I try and make it a competition. Because again, I have that athletic mentality. Like I want to try and be improving and working towards something. So I take that into the gym and it makes it fun. It makes it more enjoyable. Same thing with like nutrition. On that side of things, not necessarily a competitive aspect, but understanding the education, really getting education about why you're eating certain things. If I had known what I knew now back then, I think I would have been a way better athlete, because I would have been fueled so much better, and just so dive into the education, kind of like what I was just saying. But there's ways to mesh those post sport.
Totally. And again, I said this at the beginning, I'm not going to be the expert here. I did not go. I played softball growing up, but I only played until junior year because I was going to sit the bench on varsity. So that shows you how good I was. So I was like, no, I'll get a job instead. So haven't had this experience, but I do know just from like having that same, I think a similar mentality, the big things that I think can help is like finding something similar to it. So a team and a competition with yourself. And that's why I love bodybuilding, because it's just you against you. But having a team aspect too, whether that be, working with a coach that has a client team, or just having a community around you, people who go to the gym with, like creating that team environment, I think is huge. So
Absolutely.
well, I'm so glad we were able to have this discussion. I know this is probably very helpful to a lot of people struggling with this. So thanks so much for joining us, Nicole. Again, if you guys didn't know, she is one of our coaches here at Accelerate Athletics. She works primarily with a lot of our former athlete population. Obviously that is her wheelhouse based on everything you just learned. So thanks again for being here. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and have you plug away. Where can the people find you on all the social medias?
Oh yes. So you can find me. My Instagram is Nicole Neuwirth Fitness. Even if you go to Accelerate Athletics page, all of our coaches link like Instagram names are there. So you can find me either one of those two ways.
There you go. Love us plugging the EA page too. Let's go. Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. Bye guys. We will see you in the next episode.